Good afternoon. My name is Anna Karras and I'm a public services librarian with the Collier County Public Library System. This is part 2 of our Artitude series where you are an armchair art historian. And today we will be talking about M.C. Escher, or Maurits Cornelis Escher. M.C. Escher was born in Leeuwarden, Holland on June 17, 1898. He was the youngest of 5 boys from 2 different mothers. His father was a civil engineer and was independently wealthy. M.C. Escher was nicknamed Mock by his family, and he was a sickly child and had to repeat 2nd grade due to illness. In fact, he had trouble with most of his studies and really only excelled at art and drawing. In 1919, he attended the School of Architecture and Decorative Arts in Haarlem, and he was at first an architecture student, but did not show aptitude for math. But under the direction of his Portuguese professor, Samuel Yasoron de Mesquita, he switched to decorative arts. He was encouraged to do so, and when he left school in 1922, he was grounded in skills of drawing, woodcuts, and lithographs, even though he didn't actually graduate. The artist as a young man. M.C. Escher traveled extensively in Spain, especially Italy, from 1922 to 1924. And he was taken with the Italian landscape and the Moorish architecture of Spain, which he drew constantly. He met his wife, Jutta Umaker, who was a Swiss national of Russian extraction, at a pension in Italy. They married in 1924 and settled in Rome. They had 3 sons, George, Arthur, and Jan, the first of whom was born in 1926. And during these years in Italy, Escher made many sketching trips across the Mediterranean to draw the landscapes and architecture. But they left Italy in 1935 with the rise of fascism. M.C. Escher, while he was not interested in politics, decided that fascism was too scary, so they moved to Switzerland for 2 years and then to Belgium. His later life, they moved to Bern, Holland in 1941 to be near extended family, and that's where they were through the war, and then also through the rest of his life. He remained in the area until his death in 1972. His father supported him financially until Escher began to earn large amounts of money from his artwork starting in the early 1960s. Even so, he lived very frugally. From the time he moved home, his artwork changed and blossomed. Instead of being distracted by the beautiful landscape of Italy and Spain, his artwork became more inward-looking and reflective. And he also began to receive recognition and accolades for his artwork. Escher continued to work feverishly his whole life, producing hundreds of woodcuts and lithographs. He moved to an artist retirement home in 1970 and died in 1972 at the age of 73. Escher was not really critically acclaimed as an artist per se until later in his life. Art critics could not pigeonhole him into a category that jived with their definition of what art should be. So let's take a look at some of his artwork. With his sketching trips in the 20s and 30s, Escher would travel with his family in the spring, making sketches, and then spend the winter developing them into woodcuts and lithographs. Now, just to make a clarification here, a woodcut is a print carved from a wood block. A lithograph is carved on stone or aluminum plate, and they are both means of making prints. His obsession with majolica tiles at the Alhambra in Spain will heavily influence him in years to come. So here's the first work of art we're going to look at. It's from Trani, Italy, and it's a meticulous study of architecture and landscape. He honed his drawing skills in these prints. And I've seen the photograph of the same landscape that he was looking at. It is almost identical. You cannot tell the difference in the architecture between the print and the photograph. So these motifs will show up again and again later in his work, for example, building shapes, people, backgrounds, etc. And here is the second work of art. It's called Still Life with Mirror. It's still a landscape, as you can see in the reflection in the mirror, although this is a precursor to his World Within Worlds prints from later on in his life, which we will talk about. And you can see again the meticulous rendering of objects, almost photographic, with the landscape as a secondary subject. His landscape pictures halted abruptly when he moved his family to Switzerland, and his work turned inward and became more mathematical and tessellated, which brings us to his period of metamorphoses prints. This is Day and Night. It is a metamorphosis and at the same time a cycle. So you can see the birds turning from black to white as they fly across the top. You can see the mirrored images of the cities below, crossing the bridge, crossing the river. One is in daylight, one is in night. You can observe the change from two-dimensional, the plowed fields, to three-dimensional, which are the birds. The landscape and architecture from his earlier landscape prints can be seen here, and the tessellation of the plowed fields and birds can be seen here, which harken back to his visits to the Alhambra and those majolica tiles. Now we will move on to his perspective prints from 46 to 56. Escher was interested in unconventional standpoints. In 1946, he began his quest to challenge the rules of perspective. This is called Other World, which has zenith, nadir, and vanishing point all in one at this print. So you can see that there is a vanishing point. It seems to be in the center of the picture, and yet there are different planes where these strange birds are standing. One looks like you're looking at it from underneath, one you're looking straight on, one you're looking down upon, and yet it's all the same perspective. And then we have Crystal from 1947. Escher was fascinated by crystals. His brother was a geologist who wrote a handbook on mineralogy, and he had a lot of samples to use as subjects. And he loved vanishing points and perspectives and prisms. So that's what this one is about. Let's talk about Approaches to Infinity, which was his period from 56 to 69. Escher once wrote, "We find it impossible to imagine that somewhere beyond the furthest stars of the night sky there should come an end to space, a frontier beyond which there is nothing more. The notion of emptiness does, of course, have some meaning for us, because space can be empty, at all events conceptually, but our powers of imagination are incapable of encompassing the notion of nothingness. For this reason, as long as there have been men to lie and sit and stand upon this globe, we have all held firmly to the notion of a hereafter, purgatory, heaven, hell, rebirth, nirvana, and all of which must continue to be everlasting in time and infinite space." So he thought a lot about infinity and beginnings and endings and the cycles. Let's look first at Smaller and Smaller. This one, okay, now this is something interesting about M.C. Escher. I mentioned before that he was not a brilliant math student, and this is true. And yet, his works here, as this one, Smaller and Smaller, is supremely mathematical in its division upon division upon division, making it smaller and smaller and smaller, all at a regulated diminishment. And like I said, Smaller and Smaller is a square division print, and each square is half the size of the square next to it into infinity. Obviously he can't go completely into infinity, but the middle of that is incredibly tiny, and yet he did not do this using mathematical techniques. He just drew from what he knew and from using his logic, which is a fascinating thing. I'm not a mathematical person, and I can't understand it, so I'm not going to try to explain it to you. But he didn't either, and that's one of the reasons why he was so remarkable in his work. We also have Circle Limit 3 from 1959. All the fish of the same color swim after each other head to tail. And it was based on an illustrated volume of hyperbolic geometry by H.S.M. Coxeter. Like I said, based on a volume, but not really understanding the mathematical theorems behind it. So let's go to Drawing as Deception, or how 3D grows out of 2D. We are persuaded we are looking at a three-dimensional world of two-dimensional plane. So let's look here. Reptiles. M.C. Escher produces a 3D world from a 2D sketch. So you can see the pattern on the left is two-dimensional. It's all the lizards all put together in a repetitive form. But then you move to the work on the right, which is the little reptiles begin to take on a rounded shape as they crawl out of the picture. They climb up on the book and onto the dodecahedron, where he spurts steam from his nostrils and before climbing down and re-entering the sketch. And the thing that he wanted to illustrate here is that even though it looks 3D, it is still, in fact, a 2D plane. Everything is flat. Let's talk about the art of the Alhambra, or tessellations. It was a theme closest to M.C. Escher's heart. He went many times to the Alhambra in Spain, and he took many, many sketches of majolica tiles, as you can see here, the patterns, the repetitions, the geometric shapes. He first went in 1926, where he saw and was fascinated by this Moorish tile work. Escher thought it was a pity they did not make images, but instead geometric shapes. So he instead inserted his own imagery into it, as you can see here with angels and devils. The point where the heads and feet meet are rotation axes. You can rotate the figures 90 degrees and come up with the same pattern. Still, all done with no mathematical precepts. Let's go into explorations into perspective. So first of all, I want to show you a picture of classical perspective. Classical perspective was first expressed in art in the 15th century during the Renaissance. Horizontal and vertical lines running parallel to the picture are portrayed as is, and parallel lines that recede from us converge into a vanishing point. So you can see in this picture by Jean Fouquet, for instance, the banners above, the blue banners above the heads of the royalty sitting at the table all have vanishing point lines. The banners hanging from the trumpets of the musicians all have receding lines, as do the tiles in the floor. And like I said, the parallel lines recede from us and converge into a vanishing point. And then we have M.C. Escher's interpretation of classical perspective. This one is called Relativity. It's from 1953. And it's divided into three groups: the uprighters, the left-leaners, and the right-leaners. Perspective is turned on its head, so to speak. Exactly where is the vanishing point? You see people going up and down stairs. Sometimes, like at the top of the picture, you have one person walking down the stairs and another person walking up the stairs, and they are going in two different directions. They are both on two different planes of existence. And then we have simultaneous worlds, like I had spoken of before. So this one has three worlds in it. Two different worlds existing in one space and the same place at the same time create a sense of wonder, which is equivocal, occupying the same space simultaneously. This one is called Three Worlds, and I put a close-up of it so you could see the far-away version and the up-close version, and you can see three worlds here. There is the fish under the water, there are the leaves on the surface of the water, and there is the reflection of the trees on the water. So you have three different worlds existing in one space. And then we have worlds that cannot exist. This one is called Ascending and Descending from 1960, and it is the quasi-infinite. Do the stairs go up or do they go down? The circle is a spiral but depicted on a horizontal plane. Again, no mathematical precepts were used here. He did this all from his own logic. And it is viewed from the front of the building, and it looks plausible, but if viewed from the rear, the entire building would collapse. And then we have Waterfall from 1961, a series of triangles with three right angles, but have been joined together on a two-dimensional plane, is false, spatially impossible, but when added together, a total of 270 degrees, not 180. The waterfall is then able to be represented in a perpetual cycle. So it starts from the bottom, flows upward to the top, where it then falls to the water wheel. And you can also see, again, his well, I guess it's not a dodecahedron, but it's a decahedron of some sort, those crystal shapes that he loved on the top of the pillars there. He really loved the shapes of prisms, and he used that. And also The backgrounds and the architecture are all reminiscent of those early sketches he did in Italy and Spain. And finally, we have Approaching Infinity. This one is called Snakes, and it is Escher's final print, which was completed in 1969. And it is chainmail, edged with small rings and larger rings closer to the center. The snakes are made to twist in and out of these larger gaps. It approaches infinity on the inside and the outside of the print. You can see the small rings on the edge of the print. You can also see the small rings on the inside of the print. The center rings are less than half a millimeter. He used a magnifying glass to cut the wood block. And this meticulous attention to detail was characteristic of the artist. Escher's art is the expression of a lifelong celebration of reality, interpreted in his visualizations, unique to his talent, of the mathematical wonder of the grand design that he intuitively recognized in the patterns and rhythms of natural forms, and the intrinsic possibilities hidden in the structure of space itself. And a quote taken from the end of his life: "Perhaps all I pursue is astonishment, and so I try to awaken only astonishment in my viewers. Sometimes beauty is a nasty business." Well, that is what I have to tell you about M.C. Escher today. I hope you enjoyed it. And next week we are going to hear from a completely different artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, and I look forward to sharing her work with you. So tune back in next week, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, for another edition of Artitude. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the other side.